Hey warriors, welcome back. I want to tell you about a moment that changed everything for me. I was in a meeting, a room full of people, loud voices, arguments flying across the table. Someone said something about me, something dismissive, something designed to embarrass me in front of everyone. And I said nothing. Not because I had nothing to say, I had everything to say. I felt the fire rise in my chest. My mind was already loading the perfect response, the precise words that would cut back just as deep. But I said nothing. I just looked at him, calmly, steadily, and I let the silence breathe. Within 10 seconds, he started backtracking. Within 30, he was apologizing. By the end of the meeting, 3 other people had privately pulled me aside to say they respected how I handled it. I hadn't won with a word. I had won with the absence of one. That was the day I understood what Machiavelli spent his entire life trying to tell us, that the most dangerous weapon a human being can possess is not a sharp tongue. It is a controlled one. Today, I'm going to show you the psychology of silence. Not the silence of weakness, not the silence of someone who has nothing to say, but the silence of someone who has chosen not to say it, and made that choice into a throne. There are 7 laws to this. Each one will shift how you move through the world, and if you stay until the end, you will never engage in a worthless argument again. Before we begin, drop this in the comments right now. My silence is my power. Law 1. The silence of the certain. Machiavelli was a man who spent 28 years inside the machinery of power. He sat across tables from kings, popes, and warlords. He watched rulers rise and collapse. He served Florence through wars, betrayals, shifting alliances, and constitutional chaos. And after all of it, after everything he witnessed, he wrote one sentence that most people still haven't understood. He who wishes to be obeyed must know how to command. Command. Not convince, not explain, command. Most people believe that commanding a room requires volume, that authority comes from having the loudest argument, the quickest comeback, the most aggressive defense of your position. They've been taught that silence is emptiness, that if you say nothing, you have nothing. Machiavelli knew the opposite was true. He watched Cesare Borgia, one of the most feared men in all of Renaissance Italy, walk into negotiations without raising his voice. Borgia didn't need to shout. His reputation walked in first. His silence was not passive. It was pressure. It told everyone in the room, I already know something you don't, and I don't need to tell you what it is. That is the first law of silence. Certainty makes noise unnecessary. When you feel the urge to explain yourself, to justify your decision, to defend your character to someone who has already decided how they feel about you, ask yourself one question. What am I actually trying to win here? Because here is the brutal truth. People who demand explanations are not seeking understanding. They are seeking leverage. The moment you begin explaining, you begin handing it to them. You are showing them which buttons to press. You are drawing them a map to your insecurities. The certain man does not explain. He does not justify. He acts, and then he allows the result to speak for him. Machiavelli wrote in The Prince that a ruler who needs to constantly defend his legitimacy has already lost it. Legitimacy is not argued into existence. It is demonstrated into existence through consistency, through composure, through the quiet, unshakable certainty that you are exactly where you are supposed to be. The weak speak to fill silence because they are afraid of what the silence reveals about them. The powerful embrace silence because they know what it reveals about everyone else. Drop this in the comments. I do not explain myself to those who don't deserve clarity. Law 2. Silence as a mirror. Here is something most people have never been taught about human psychology. When you go silent, truly, deliberately silent, the person across from you does not experience peace. They experience panic. Their mind rushes to fill the void. They start projecting. They start questioning themselves. They start replaying the conversation, wondering what your silence means, wondering if they've gone too far, wondering if they've miscalculated. And in that state of uncertainty, they begin to reveal everything. They talk more. They over-explain. They soften their position. They backtrack. They apologize for things you never accused them of. They confess to motivations they never intended to share. Your silence became a mirror, and people are terrified of what they see when they look honestly at themselves. Machiavelli understood this. During his time as a Florentine diplomat, carrying out missions to France, to Borgia's court, to the Pope's chambers, he documented something remarkable. The most effective negotiators were not the ones who said the most. They were the ones who listened the most and who revealed the least. He wrote, "Never reveal all your thoughts, for it makes you predictable and vulnerable." Predictability is the death of influence. The moment someone can anticipate your reaction, they can control it. They can provoke you on purpose, then watch you perform exactly as they expected. They pull the string, you move. That's not power. That's a puppet show. Silence breaks that mechanism entirely. When you do not react, you force the other person to operate without a script. They expected noise from you. They prepared for noise. They rehearsed their lines based on what they assumed you would say. And when you say nothing, when you simply look at them with calm, measured eyes, their whole performance falls apart. They are suddenly improvising. And improvisation exposes the truth. This is why, throughout history, the most feared interrogators were not the ones who shouted and threatened. They were the ones who sat quietly, said little, and allowed the weight of silence to do what no threat could: make the other person feel desperately compelled to fill it. You don't need to be in an interrogation room for this principle to apply. It works in arguments with your partner, in negotiations with your boss, in confrontations with someone who has disrespected you. In any moment where the social pressure is pushing you to react, to defend, to perform. The next time someone says something designed to provoke you, try this. Breathe. Hold their gaze. Say nothing. And count silently to 10. You will be stunned by what they do in those 10 seconds. You will watch a person dismantle their own position in real time simply because your silence made them nervous. That is power. That is law 2. Drop this in the comments. My stillness unsettles the ones who wanted my reaction. Law 3. The strategic retreat. Machiavelli was arrested in February of 1513, accused of conspiracy, thrown into a prison cell, tortured on the rack, a device that dislocated the shoulders 4 separate times. And he refused to confess to something he hadn't done. When they finally released him, he didn't make speeches, he didn't seek vengeance publicly, he didn't fill the streets of Florence with his grievances. He went to a small farm south of the city. He tended to his land during the day, and at night he changed his filthy work clothes, put on formal court robes, and sat alone at his desk. And he wrote. He wasn't being passive, he was being strategic. Out of that silence, that deliberate withdrawal from the chaos he had been expelled from, came The Prince, the discourses, the art of war, works that would reshape how power is understood for the next 500 years. Machiavelli didn't disappear, he repositioned. This is Law 3. Withdrawal is not retreat, it is recalibration. Most people believe that staying silent means surrendering the field, that walking away from conflict means losing, that if you don't respond, you are agreeing. They rush back into every argument, into every drama, into every social media comment section where someone challenged them, because they have been taught that visibility equals relevance. But consider this. What do you think about most? Things you've seen, or things you can't quite place? The person who spoke their mind completely and left nothing to your imagination? Or the person who said just enough to make you wonder what they were really thinking? We are psychologically drawn to mystery. We orbit what we cannot fully grasp. The person who says everything at once uses up all their influence in a single burst. The person who says little, thoughtfully, over time, they become a permanent fixture in the minds of everyone around them. This is why Machiavelli also wrote, "A wise man ought never to make himself depend wholly on one thing." Don't depend on your words to build your authority. Don't depend on your arguments to establish your worth. Depend on your pattern, your consistency, your measured, deliberate presence over time. When you walk away from a fight you could have won loudly, you win something better. You win the reputation of someone who doesn't need to win. And people who don't need to win are the ones everyone eventually stops challenging. The strategic retreat is not weakness. It is the long game. And only the patient play the long game. And only those who play the long game build empires that last. Drop this in the comments. I don't argue, I position. Law 4. What you withhold becomes your currency. There is an invisible economy running beneath every human relationship. In this economy, the currency is not money. It is access. Access to your time, to your attention, to your emotional interior, to the truth of what you think and feel and want. Most people spend this currency recklessly. They give access freely, immediately to anyone who asks. They answer every message the moment it arrives. They share their goals before they've achieved them. They explain their plans before they've executed them. They confess their fears to people who haven't earned the right to know them. And then they wonder why people stop valuing what they offer. Machiavelli watched this dynamic destroy rulers. He wrote about it directly. Princes who were too eager to be loved, too quick to show warmth, too transparent in their desires, these men were not respected. They were managed. The people around them learned to say what pleased them. They learned to manipulate through flattery. The prince thought he was loved. He was actually surrounded by a network of quiet control. Men are ungrateful, fickle, false, cowardly, and covetous, Machiavelli wrote, not because he was cynical, because he was watching. And what he was watching was this: humans instinctively assign value based on scarcity. What is rare is precious. What is abundant is taken for granted. Your words are no different. When you speak rarely, your words carry mass. People lean in when you begin to talk. They remember what you said. They replay it later. They treat your opinion as something worth having because you have taught them, through your silence, that you do not give it away. When you speak constantly, your words become noise. People process them the same way they process background sound, present but unheard. This is not manipulation. This is a fundamental law of human psychology. We value what we must work for. We dismiss what costs us nothing. So begin to ration, not artificially, not as a performance, but as a genuine act of self-respect. Ask yourself before you speak,
Does this need to be said? Does it need to be said by me? Does it need to be said by me right now?
If the answer to any of those three is no, hold it. Let the silence sit. Let it make the next thing you do say feel like it matters, because it will. Drop this in the comments. What I withhold is worth more than what I give away. Law 5. Silence after the strike. When Borgia needed to eliminate a threat, he did not give lengthy explanations. He did not hold press conferences. He did not seek public validation for his decisions. He acted, cleanly, decisively, without fanfare. And then he returned to silence. Machiavelli watched this and wrote, "A punishment delivered with calm is terrifying. It shows the action is not about spite, it is about law." This is one of the most misunderstood aspects of power. People think the goal of conflict is to win the argument. But winning an argument gives you a moment. What you actually want is to end the argument permanently, to make it so clear, so final, so undeniable that the subject never has to be revisited. The way you achieve that is with silence after the strike. When someone crosses a boundary and you respond, when you withdraw access, when you end a relationship, when you enforce a consequence, the worst thing you can do is follow it with explanation, with justification, with an open door for negotiation. Every word you speak after the action dilutes it. The action said everything. The silence that follows tells them the matter is closed, that you are not performing, that you are not angry, that you simply decided, and decisions, for someone like you, are final. This is what separates emotional reactivity from genuine power. An emotional reaction screams and then forgets. Power acts quietly and remembers forever. When you learn to act without announcing and to follow action with silence, you become unpredictable in the most effective way. No one knows exactly where your line is. They only know that once it's crossed, the discussion is over. And the safest people in any environment are always the ones where no one is sure exactly how far they can push. Drop this in the comments. My actions are the statement. My silence is the period. Law 6. The silence of self-mastery. Everything we've discussed comes down to this. Silence is only possible when you no longer need the world to confirm your worth. This is the root of all of it. The reason most people cannot stay silent is not tactical. It's emotional. They speak because they need to be seen. They argue because they need to be right. They explain because they need to be understood. They react because they need to feel that what was done to them mattered, that someone, somewhere, acknowledged the wound. And in that need, they hand over everything. Machiavelli spent the final years of his life in exile, dismissed from the government he had served for 14 years, stripped of offices, overlooked for positions he was more qualified for than anyone else in Florence. He watched men with less skill and less vision receive what he deserved. And he didn't collapse. He didn't publicly plead. He didn't flood the streets with his grievance. He mastered himself. He wrote. He refined his thinking. He built something so enduring that 500 years later, his name is still spoken in rooms of power. The men who dismissed him are footnotes. He is the curriculum. That is what self-mastery through silence produces. Not a temporary victory in a petty argument, a legacy. Machiavelli wrote, "He who is wise will be master of himself, for he who is mastered by others is never free."
Freedom is not the absence of opposition. Freedom is the ability to remain fully yourself in the presence of it, to not be pulled off your axis, to not be baited into noise by people who can only control you if you react. The most untouchable thing about a person is not their strength. It is their stillness. Because stillness says, "You do not have the power to disturb me.
I am complete without your approval. I do not need this conversation to go a certain way in order to feel okay about myself." That energy, calm, full, unhurried, is what Machiavelli called true command. It cannot be faked. It can only be built. And it is built in the moments when you feel the urge to speak, to defend, to react, and you choose not to. Every time you hold your tongue when you didn't have to, you make a deposit. Every time you let silence answer for you, you make a deposit. Until eventually, the account is so full that your composure stops being an effort and becomes simply who you are. And when that happens, people feel it when you walk in a room. Not because you're loud, because you're still. And stillness in a world of noise is the rarest, most magnetic quality a human being can possess. Drop this in the comments. I am complete. I don't need to prove it. Law 7. Become the question they can't answer. The final law brings everything together. Machiavelli's deepest insight, the one that runs beneath the prince, beneath the discourses, beneath every observation he ever made about power, is this: the most dangerous person in any room is not the one with the loudest voice. It is the one who cannot be fully understood. Rulers fell not because they lacked strength, but because they became predictable, legible. Once you know how someone will respond to pressure, you control them. Once you understand their desires, you can offer them as a leash. Once you can see into them completely, they hold no mystery, and mystery is the final armor. Your goal, after everything you've learned today, is not to become cold. It is not to become cruel. It is not to speak less simply to seem mysterious. Your goal is to become the question no one can fully answer. To be the person in the room who observes more than they speak, who acts more than they promise, who thinks 3 moves ahead while others are still reacting to the last one. To build a reputation not through declarations but through patterns, through the accumulated weight of 1,000 moments where you chose composure over chaos, strategy over emotion, silence over noise. The people who move the world are rarely the loudest ones in it. They are the ones who waited, who watched, who chose their words like a general chooses a battlefield, only when the terrain is favorable, who understood that language spends power, while silence stores it. Machiavelli spent his life in service to Florence, watching empires rise and fall, watching the bold and the reckless consume themselves with noise, while the patient and composed outlasted them all. He understood that the true architecture of power is not built in the moments of confrontation. It is built in the moments of restraint, in the breath you took before you responded, in the silence you held when they expected noise, in the calm you kept when they were certain you would break. That is where your power lives, not in what you've said, in what you've chosen not to say. Walk into every room knowing that. Let your silence speak before your words do. Let your composure tell the story before your mouth opens. And become the kind of person that no one is quite sure how to handle, because no one can fully read you. No one can predict you. No one can reduce you to a formula. Machiavelli would call that sovereignty.
I call it untouchable. You came here today searching for something. Maybe you didn't know what to call it, but now you do. You were looking for silence. Not the silence of someone who has nothing to say, the silence of someone who has chosen, deliberately, powerfully, strategically, to say nothing. And in that nothing, said everything. You now carry 7 laws, the certainty that makes noise unnecessary, the mirror you become when you stop reacting, the strategic retreat that repositions you above the chaos, the currency you build by withholding access.
The finality of silence after decisive action. The self-mastery that makes your stillness magnetic, and the mystery that makes you impossible to fully control. These are not tricks. They are not manipulation tactics. They are a philosophy, one that Machiavelli spent his entire life building through real diplomatic missions, real wars, real betrayals, real prisons, real exile. He earned these truths the hard way. Now they belong to you. The world will keep trying to pull a reaction from you. It will provoke, test, dismiss, underestimate. Let it. You are no longer available for that performance. You are the silence in the storm, the stillness in the argument, the calm that walks out of every confrontation with more than it walked in with. Say it in the comments one final time. I am the power of saying nothing. If this reached something in you, share it with someone who needs it. Hit the like button, subscribe. The next video goes even deeper. See you there.